Hi, I'm Doug Mackenzie and welcome to FF News' The Paytech Show. Now on today's episode, we're going to be looking at commerce and not just the electronic kind. Joining us here today in the studio, we have Eddie Johnson from Aevi, a company that are facilitating the huge changes to the POS or the point of sale devices that you see in every store, cafe or bar you can go to. Also joining us, we have Coventry from American Express, a card provider that are revolutionizing the way that you get rewarded for paying. And finally, we also have Harshna Kayley joining us virtually from Barclaycard. Now, Harshna Kayley has been working religiously when it comes to changing the payment scene from a traditional banking provider, and I'm really excited to see what she's going to have to say about the changes to the way that we're going to be paying. Eddie, how are you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Very well indeed. Let's get on with it. It's time to talk about payments orchestration, and I really want to actually set the scene, and maybe if you could tell our viewers a bit more about yourself, your role at Aevi, and Aevi itself.
Sure. So my name's Eddie Johnson. My current role at Aevi is I'm the VP of Product. That means I'm responsible for everything that we bring to market, everything that we sell to our customers, and the future of kind of where we're going to be going, and trying to keep my eye on what we need to be prepared for in the industry. In terms of Aevi themselves, we are a in-person payments specialist company historically, and that's kind of evolved into being an orchestration platform for payments and a platform that brings different types of payments together for our customers who tend to be people who want to service merchants. So we're one step back from the merchant front end, but we're obviously thinking about the merchants on behalf of our customers.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love that kind of looking at the very end of the chain, because that's where the human story is, and a lot of merchants are in a brand new payment ecosystem that a lot might not understand because of the huge changes in payments. Now, before we go on and discuss that kind of futurist perspective that I know you have, let's again set the scene and look at payments over the last couple of years, and what have been the biggest changes for you?
Yeah, I mean, payments has historically been a very slow-moving industry, and I mean, I remember when I actually joined the payment space, whatever it was, 8, 9, 10 years ago now. I came from a digital background, and I really enjoyed coming into payments. I used to joke with my colleagues that I only need to be 4 years out of date and I get to be bleeding edge. But really, the change that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years is that's entirely exploded. The reins have come off, and payments has started moving at a pace which befits the consumer, and the biggest reason for that is because of the shift towards the consumer themselves being the point of focus. I think the biggest change is if you look over the last 5 to 10 years in payments, we've moved from a position where payments is a luxury. Card payments, digital payments is a luxury in store, and it's seen as something that, if you walk into a store as a consumer and they can accept the type of payment you want, then you've hit the jackpot, you're lucky, right? Whereas now, as a consumer, I walk into a store and I expect to pay however I want to pay, and if I can't pay how I want to pay in that store, I'll go to another store. I've got the choice, I've got the flexibility, I've got the power in my hands as a consumer, and so what's happened is the payments industry has had to rush to keep up with that. And I think we're now at the point, and really what's happened in the last 2 years, is we've got to the point where we've caught up with that, and we're now starting to try and get ahead of the game. We're starting to try and get ahead of the curve to really try and push the payment space forwards rather than just react to what the consumers are shouting about. And that's driven in many ways by many different things. You've got the payments disruptors coming up, you've got the smaller players now able to play in the payment space, but also just the full digitization of payments. And obviously with things like the pandemic for the last 2 years, that's been a big driver for a lot of consumers, but a lot of merchants as well, is they just want to go fully digital. And by going fully digital, it just really opens the playing field to the sort of breadth of payment experience that you have these days. I guess my final point about what's changed in the last 2 years is the options are now pretty much endless, right? You get to choose how you want to pay, when you want to pay, what kickbacks you get from how you pay, how many payments do you want to make for that one purchase, and as an industry, we have to be able to support that choice.
Harshna, thank you so much for joining us here today. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you very much, Doug. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, Harshna, could you tell our viewers a bit more about yourself and your role at Barclaycard, please?
Of course I can. So look, I've been at Barclays for over a year now, and I head up the online payments product team at Barclaycard Payments. I've got around 20 years experience under my belt, having worked at a number of brands like WellPay and Visa and so on. So I know this industry and this environment pretty well.
Amazing. Right. Well, Harsha, let's kick it off then. How has the payments ecosystem actually evolved in recent years? What have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, before I do that, just talking about Barclaycard Payments and why I feel that not just in my role, but also as an organisation, we're in a great position to comment on that particular question. Barclaycard Payments is the number one payment processor in the UK. It's the number two merchant acquirer in Europe, and the number one commercial card provider in Europe. So, with some of those reference points and those credentials, we've got a great foundation to talk to you on. The scale that we have around our expertise, data and insights, the solutions that we put in the hands of our customers is pretty incredible, particularly around helping those businesses grow, and particularly with the backdrop of cost of living, economic uncertainties, and so on. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And as we think about the question that you just asked around how the payment ecosystem has evolved in recent years, well, look, over the last few years in particular, we've seen a rapid shift around e-commerce and online adoption. We've seen a whole movement in terms of more and more payment methods, more and more payment choices for consumers to navigate at the point of checkout. We're seeing much more commerce activity online. We're seeing an increased amount of contactless payments and e-commerce payment. And the market has shifted, consumer behavior has shifted massively over the last few years. And I think, just to comment on one other trend that we've been seeing is particularly around buy now, pay later. This is starting to become a popular payment choice for many consumers out there. Yeah. Again, with the backdrop of the squeeze around cost of living, buy now, pay later certainly gives consumers lots of choice and flexibility around payments. And what we're finding is retailers are offering these choices much more in that checkout experience. Yeah. And then lastly, I think the other trend that we've seen is more and more changes around the regulatory landscape, and in particular in 2022 we saw the biggest change in the last 16 years around mandatory strong customer authentication, known as SCA. Yeah. And so since March in the UK, online transactions over £25 are now subjected to an additional identity check. So it does clearly help towards combating fraud. It does introduce a little bit of friction in that customer experience, but it's so important to balance protecting consumers, protecting businesses, and also, ensuring that customer experience is really smooth. So, those are some of the high-level snippets in terms of the trends that we've seen more recently.
Holly, how are you doing here today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Holly, could you tell our audience a bit more about yourself, your role at American Express too, as well, please?
Sure. So my name's Holly Coventry. I'm the VP of Open Banking Payments at American Express, which in itself isn't necessarily what people expect. So I'm responsible for the growth of open banking payments at American Express, which are nothing to do with our cards, actually.
Yeah, I think that speaks to just how much the industry has changed over the last couple of years. And I guess to kind of set the scene then, could you tell our viewers a bit more about how the payments industry has changed in the last couple of years and how American Express is playing a big role in that?
Sure. Firstly, just to say, I think, the payments industry at the moment is a really exciting space to be a part of. It's going through huge amounts of disruption and change. Technology is a huge catalyst for some of the exciting things that are happening as an industry. So it's a great sector to be part of. And I think consumers are driving a lot of that change as well, right? You know, they have exceptionally high expectations when it comes to commerce, and how they pay is a big part of that. You know, people expect one click quite often now. We've all got very accustomed to tapping and going, using our device to do everything on now. So, you know, all of that leads to hugely exciting new innovation and opportunities within the sector as well.
And again, just beyond that sort of the choice, the flexibility, the ability to accept the type of payment that I want to make, I think the demand from the customer is that it's invisible. It's really just, you know, whether the customer knows this or not consciously, right? They don't want to have to think about the point of payment. And certainly the merchant doesn't want the customer to have to think about the point of payment. They want the customer to have an experience of getting something from their store. And that's you know, it's really funny, right? When we go and talk in industry events, we're quite often now one of the very few players that are still really talking about in-person payments. There's a huge amount of buzz around e-commerce and online payments and all of this sort of stuff, but we're really still focused on in-person. And one of the big reasons for that is I don't think it's going anywhere. There is nothing quite like that sort of rush that you get as a consumer when you go somewhere, you physically pick something up, you go and then it's yours, right? You own it. And the merchants want to drive that experience even more, and to do that, they need seamless payments. They need payments which don't make the consumer worry, they don't make the consumer think, they don't offer any resistance to the consumer, but equally, they still give the benefits to the merchant. You know, things like being able to have hyper-personalization and things like being able to drive customer loyalty, but without getting in the way of that sort of seamless experience of shopping and purchasing something. So there's that sort of fine line balance in in-person payments, which for me isn't quite there in e-commerce. You've got more space and time to drive more things. In-person, it's about walking that line between how do I make the payment process disappear completely, but how do I still get as much benefit out of that payment experience, both for the consumer, but also for the merchant that's accepting that payment.
So the in-store payments is a really exciting space, particularly when it comes to open banking. When we first started looking at open banking payments and the sector started to come to life in the UK, it was all about online and digital payments. I think there's one positive that's come out of the pandemic. It's really disrupted how we pay for things in store. I think, you know, if we'd had this conversation 4 years ago and we talked about QR codes in store and, you know, sitting in a pub and ordering a pint and paying for it through a QR code, we probably would have said that was years away.
I couldn't have fathomed it.
Exactly. You know, parts of, you know, Asia, they've been doing it for years, but the pandemic has really disrupted that payment experience. And again, primarily, you know, consumers are demanding safe across all aspects of that payment journey, and they're just expecting, you know, efficient ways to pay as well. So, you know, the in-store is a really interesting space, and one that I say we're seeing a lot more disruption in than I think we probably would have anticipated had we had this conversation 5 years ago.
Now, I think it's fair to say, Harshna, that there's one big buzzword that I'd love to get your definition on, because I think a lot of people have varying thoughts on it. You know, what is payments orchestration?
It's absolutely a term that's getting a lot of attention in the payments industry, and clearly retailers or you know, businesses of all sizes will be thinking about, well, you know, when do I think about a payment orchestrator? Well, look, very simply put, a payment orchestrator is essentially an orchestrator of payment capabilities. It's come in as part of that payments value chain. It offers retailers with the ability to essentially consolidate and aggregate into one place, so that they can route their payment flow to a number of payment service providers and not just be tied to one. So as an orchestrator, it's a piece in the middle of that payment process, and it just provides that simplification in terms of managing multiple payment providers. Quite similar to, I would say propositions or facilitators out there, when you're looking at getting the best deal for whether it's utilities or whether it's insurance. There's obviously aggregators out in the market. Payment orchestration is somewhat similar in the fact that it just makes it easier to work with an orchestrator who can then provide a one-stop shop to be able to then access a range of payment service providers. Payment orchestration is typically it provides cloud-based technology capability. Again, takes the burden away from the client having to think about, investment in technology on their side if they work with a payment orchestrator who already comes with some of that capability. And it just provides smart routing as well. So smart routing in terms of being able to offer up the latest payment method, or the latest value-added service, or the latest fraud capability. So that's what a payment orchestrator does. It provides that middle simplification layer, and it provides smart routing to be able to leverage capabilities that you may not necessarily have within your environment.
It's a nice bit of payments jargon, that, isn't it? Even for someone that's worked in it for a number of years. We're an industry laden with some of these terms. Payment orchestration, certainly the way that I think about it, is about enabling merchants to offer the right way to pay to their customers at the right time. It's about making sure that you are building payment experiences that are finely tuned to what your consumer is expecting at the point in their purchase journey. And a good sort of analogy or way to think about it is it's almost a bit like the Netflix algorithm, right? It's about understanding what your customers are doing and enabling you to push those right payment buttons at the right time.
We've spoken quite a lot about the end consumer, but let's dive into payments orchestration a bit more. And obviously when you've got so many different ways to pay, and as you mentioned, you've got to constantly find the latest way to pay, how can merchants keep up with that? How can payment institutions enable this ability for merchants to be able to just have a one-stop shop and accept all those different payment options?
Yeah, the short answer is there are very few companies in the world that will be able to give you a full one-stop shop anymore. I'm not saying they don't exist, there are a couple, and certainly there are some big end-to-end players that do everything from the point of sale device all the way through to their own acquiring. And they more and more want to offer as much as possible to become that one-stop shop. But the reality is, for everyone else, you're gonna need to play with multiple partners. There is no one answer to everything. And again, that's where orchestration, where integration becomes really key, because one of the challenges of working with many different partners is, well, how does all that data flow? How do all of those things work well together? How do I make sure that the experience A, if I'm using route A, is the same as experience B if I'm using route B? And that's kind of where we're playing, is we're saying, look, you don't need to find one acquirer that accepts every payment type. You don't need to find one point of sale terminal that can do everything. What you do is you find the right components which are right for you, which allow you to build up that ecosystem, and then you have a platform that ties those things together. So as and when you need to add alternative payments, you don't need to wait for the acquirer to support it. We can go directly to the alternative payment method and integrate and switch those transactions through to the APM instead of going through to the traditional acquirer. As and when, for our customers, you want to evolve how you accept those payments on the front end, you can change the terminals in the field, and the new terminals will do the same that the old terminals did. And as you want to change how you acquire those payments in the back end, we can seamlessly switch from acquiring route A to B to C. And again, we're just all about that openness, that flexibility, not tying people into these walled gardens, these end-to-end spaces, but actually saying, look, we can take a really good guess, but we don't know where payments is going in the next 5 years. You know, it might be that everything goes soft POS and it's consumer bring your own devices and off-the-shelf devices everywhere, and you know, every large retailer who already has stock-taking devices, well, all of those are going to be payment enabled, and basically every screen's a payment device, right? That might be the way it goes, or it may go the way that Amazon wants it to go, which is, you know, fully no touch point at all. Consumer walks into the store, we identify them through a barrier, and then they don't need to pay. It might go that way as well. But importantly, you need to have the flexibility to know that whichever way it goes, or you know, this magical third route which hasn't even really been discovered yet, whichever way it goes, can you support that? And the answer, if you're using a proper orchestration system, is yeah, absolutely. As far as we're concerned, how the payment is accepted is just an endpoint, and then how we process the payment is just another integration point. And we can tie those things together and mean that their systems still work really nicely together. And online's a really interesting one, right? Again, you know, when we go down to the trade floor, we tend to be the people still talking in person in a world of online. And again, online is a hugely competitive space, right? Something like, and I'm sure these figures have changed a little bit slightly recently, but something like 85% of payments are still in person. And so at the moment, you've got an entire industry vying for that last, you know, 10 to 15 to 20, whatever it is now, % of the payment space. And so our approach to online is to say, look, there are going to be companies that do it way better than us. That's not our specialism. But what we want to be able to do is enable you to pick the right online solution, the right online companies, and deliver a seamless, and I hasten to use the word omni-channel, but certainly cross-channel payments experience by using the best in-person solutions and the best online solutions, and have those platforms connected properly, have the interconnections, the data sharing, the ways that those transactions can work really nicely integrated together. And again, I think that's a really good way of doing it, because online is hyper complicated, but for different reasons, right? In person is super complicated because it's heavily regulated and it's devices, and you know, there's physicality there, and you've got to get things to places to actually have acceptance. Online is hyper complicated because of the breadth of it, right? And we're starting to see some of that in person, but you know, I mean, I as a consumer get to the point now where if I have to pay on a website and I actually have to type my card number in, I kind of see that as a chore now, right? With, you know, with Google Pay, with you know, PayPal, with all of these acceptance routes that mean I don't need to type anything in. I just go, yeah, make pay happen, please. You know, so there's a whole load of complexity around online, which there are, you know, lots of very good companies dealing with in very, very good ways. And so the way we play that is we're completely agnostic to what online payments our customers want to use. We make sure that we are able to play nice with those customers, with those companies, and give really solid integrations to say, look, you know, let's share that data. Let's be open about what payment transactions have happened in store, what payment transactions have happened online. What do you know about the person that's paid with the card with this number? Oh, well, we know this about that customer, and you can start to tie that data together and actually have that single customer view and all of those sorts of things. But there are only two ways that happens. One is you find that monolith company that can do everything, and they do all of your online payments and all of your in-store payments and all of the device stuff, and then obviously they have all of the data. So they can start tying that all together. Or you adopt openness, you adopt open standards, and you adopt, you know, this method of integrating different parties together who are specialists in their own ways, and you have conversations and you say, hey, look, well, who's going to be the primary platform for X and Y? And, you know, often that involves a modicum certainly from some of the companies that we work with of, you know, competitive collaboration where, you know, maybe we're both trying to offer the same service in one area. There's a Venn diagram with a big red overlap in the middle, but we need to work together to make sure that the end customer, again, either the ISO, ISV, acquirer, merchant, whoever that end customer is, gets the best possible service for their needs.
We know that the market is shifting much more towards the software, the acceptance that payments can happen on any device, or even necessarily with, you know, not necessarily with a device. You know, I think that the role of hardware will start to really reduce over time in years to come as payments are powered through your mobile device, whether it's Android or iOS and so on. We've certainly seen with the launch of our Smart Pay Touch, the Barclaycard Smart Pay Touch device quite recently, that whilst it's our all-in-one point of sale solution in providing the run your business proposition as well as payments, we know that the software that is on that particular device is device agnostic, right? And it will enable other propositions like tap on phone, which is again, as I mentioned earlier on, that there will be more and more use cases where tap on phone is the way that small businesses in particular pay, right, without having to attach a hardware to their phone to be able to take payments, which is what we're familiar with seeing today. I'd say also with the footprint that we have across Barclaycard Payments, we are the UK's most connected bank with 11 million digitally connected customers. So we know from this data, both from a consumer angle and a merchant angle, what this data enables in terms of, what the demands are, what the needs are, and how we can solve those. And then look, I think that there's a number of innovations that will occur in this space, particularly as the blurring of lines happens between the in-store, the e-commerce, and therefore to the points that we've made earlier on around that omni-channel just being there, always on, friction-free, any channel, any interaction, any touch point, and commerce and payments just feeling like one. So that's what the point of sale innovations, the in-store innovations are starting to merge into, is the bringing together of the in-store and the e-commerce environment.
Harshna, it's been such a pleasure having you on the Paytech Show. It's been really fascinating hearing all the work you've been doing over at Barclaycard. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you've enjoyed yourself too.
Thank you for having me. It was great chatting to you, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on the Paytech Show. It's been an absolute pleasure having Eddie, Harshna and Holly here today. And I hope you've enjoyed yourself too. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at ffnews.com and of course YouTube, but especially LinkedIn, where you'll see me in the comments. Goodbye.